Ladies and gentlemen, I am joined by Gerry Crispin, an absolute legend in the world of recruiting, and basically the man who came up with the term the candidate experience, which also tells you a bit about how long he's been in this industry, longer actually than I've been alive. And he knows more than any of us about the candidate experience. So tell me, Gerry, how did you come up with the candidate experience and what does it entail for you?
Well, yeah, I do appreciate the comments there. I'm a student of recruiting and have been for all the 50 plus years that I've been in recruiting. Um, and and I've always felt that there is a problem with our profession if we cannot really understand how to support all of the stakeholders in a way that operates at a baseline. And I don't believe that recruiting still, in general, operates to call out key baselines below which we're not really recruiting. We may be abusing the stakeholders involved, and above which there's many paths that we can take in how we do our work. But I also believe that not living up to some basic issues with how the candidate is treated impacts our ability to be proud of what we do in the long term from a career point of view. And, I was recruiting in the 1970s, for God's sake, but I've also been recruiting in the 2000s. And fortunately, I don't need to do that on a day-to-day basis, but I love and support recruiters, recruiting leaders, and others who will reach out to understand what the needs are for everybody, the hiring manager, the leaders in the organization, the employer in general, what you need yourself. But the person who doesn't have a champion is typically the candidate. And so we have a responsibility, I think, to be a champion for the candidate. And so for many years, 30 or more years, I've been writing about what we need to do with the candidate. I don't know if I would take responsibility for coming up with a phrasing, but there's an issue around fairness of candidates, and I think we'll probably morph from candidate experience to a subject around what is the fairness in terms of how we treat candidates that we can measure and own as being accountable in our business.
I want to get back to the fairness point in a minute because I really love that piece of the topic. But I'm first of all very curious, what do you see is the biggest change? I mean, well, you've been talking about the candidate experience, you said for 30 years. Um, what are the biggest changes? Have we actually gone from candidates should be lucky that we are even talking to them to a decent level? Have we uh, has the bar gone up, or what have you seen happening in the last 30 years?
Well, the bar is still pretty low if we looked at the millions of people, the tens of millions of people who are hired each year and how they are treated. You would find still that a very low bar exists in terms of the treatment of candidates. We tend, I think, to look at it as we did, even 100 years ago, that we line up those people that seem interested. We quickly disperse all of those that don't meet our basic requirements and ignore them. We by and large filter quickly. Now with AI, we can filter very quickly to a handful that we consider to be a slate, if you will, within the framework of a pool of candidates. And now the question is, a candidate is an individual who's expressed interest. That's my definition. There is no standard definition. But if you look at it from that perspective, do we treat those candidates we're not going forward with some basic closure? So here would be an answer to your question. One very simple practice is closure. Do I tell you within a reasonable period of time, set expectations and then deliver against them, that we're not going forward with you, Bass? I'm sorry, but we are going to continue forward with other candidates at this time, and whether I give you more feedback or not is another set of issues. But the point is, I at least close the loop within a set expected time frame. So weeks later, you're not sitting by the phone still waiting for me to let you know why you're not competitive for the job. So that is a key issue, a key practice, below which I don't believe you're recruiting, above which there's many approaches and paths. And fundamentally, I think we've moved the needle a little bit, but it's really the companies that are proud of creating a kind of culture for their employers, for their employees, and therefore are trying to reflect that in how they treat candidates who might become employees. They do a better job, and we can measure whether or not that one practice, for example, exists by asking the candidate after the fact, were you given information about closure? Because 90% of them aren't going forward, right? So I can measure the degree to which that happens if I'm asking candidates from a sample set of employers. And that's what the talent board does, actually. It's not my company, but it's one that I founded 12 years ago and now studies how we treat candidates.
And have you seen massive changes in that? How are the candidates feeling how they're treated?
Yeah, so those candidates that feel that they had closure, even though they did not go forward, those candidates who recognize that the company set expectations, everything from how they would be treated in an interview to how long an application takes. So setting expectations, recognizing that companies are listening to them, because when a company says to them, is there anything else that we haven't asked you that you would like to tell us that makes you competitive for this position? And I say, oh, in our interview or in the application, you didn't provide me with X or ask me about X. I'd like to tell you about this. And the company, in effect, reflects on that and says, okay, so this is one of the things that we can add to the mix of things that we're looking at from a selection point of view. Those are the kinds of practices that correlate to very high candidate NPS type scores. Cool. And so we can measure essentially that when we're dealing with large numbers of candidates for given employers, and we can correlate that to a set of specific practices around how we set expectations, how we listen, how we close, how we call ourselves accountable so is a recruiter in fact rated or evaluated on their performance of how they handle candidates, and how is that measured? If at all, some companies are doing that. And so we know that there's a small but growing number of companies that are paying attention to it. And we think that we should be able to align those practices that affect candidates who are not going forward as having more value for the company in terms of being more attractive to candidates who are qualified, to employees who are motivated, and to the performance of the company in terms of its long-term goal of making money and doing something useful.
You said fairness. Do you have any indication what makes a fair assessment within the eyes of the candidate?
Yeah, that's the answer to the question. If I ask the question of a candidate in the application, were you able to share all of the experiences, knowledge, and skills that you feel are important to share with that company about this job? If the answer is yes, there's a perception of fairness. If I ask the same question about the interview you took with the recruiter, the interview you took with the hiring manager, the summary, if you will, of all the interviews, assuming you went that far, and that question was continually asked, then what you see is those questions and the answers to them have a almost 100% correlation to the perception of fairness by the candidate.
So we should give the candidate a chance to even offer information which we might not know they want to offer in order to increase the candidate experience.
It's the candidate's perception of fairness surrounds their ability, if you will, to have competed for the job, to believe they've competed for the job. And some candidates are more skilled in a short period of time of saying all that they need to say because maybe they've been coached well. Other candidates maybe have not had that. And so later on, they're saying, oh, damn, I wish I had done this. I wish I had done whatever. And that relates to the extent to which the company set the opportunity up for them to be able to do that and do that well. Really good recruiters keep probing around that, right? So it's an intuitive issue for a great recruiter, but not everyone is able to do that and do that well.
All right, last quick question. What do you think is going to move the needle on a better candidate experience in the next couple of years the most?
Two things. One is transparency on the part of the employer. Okay. And the second is a quality of coaching of candidates to step up to make better decisions about the better information they're now getting from those employers. What's missing in recruiting and in our profession is that we focus too heavily on the decision the employer makes. And the employer can only make a decision of whether the candidate can do the job. But only the candidate can make a decision on will they do the job, given their condition of life, all the other pressures and issues that come to them that are both in and outside of work.
Gerry, thank you very much for your time.